Down there include bin lot events to mark the century of Planet War I, but Africa has rarely nominal a refer. Yet as portion of the war force the colonialist powers utilized hundreds of thousands of Africans as porters to conduct hard loads above enormous distances. Now a brave new theatre chunk at Tate Contemporary in London is expressive the history. The job of southward African painter William Kentridge has frequently seemed difficult to categorize. He deals in a kind of drawings and animations, but the chief and the loading may be the low classifiable of the many. Composers Thuthuka Sibisi and Philip Milling machine operator include United Kentridge to build an emergency job for actors and singers, that evokes a substantially unidentified scene of story. William Kentridge says the quantity of Africans developed on African ground in 1914-18 by the fighter nations of Europe was enormous. This Europe war had a greater echoing in Africa rather than human beings understand since the combatants had their colonies. By 1914 Belgium, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal and Spain had all purchased lumps of Africa. Berlin's largest interests lay in Deutsche East Africa, approximately presents Tanzania and Rwanda, and Deutsche southward Western Africa, Namibia. Britain and its allies were diamond how position war Germany would miss its African belongings. The new draft's origins lay in Kentridge's absence of expertise on the entire trial, he admits. I believe whites Africans of my general grew up read Wilfred Owen and all peaceful on the west front line, it bounded our picture of the warfare. Several of the largest spectacular sequences on phase aroused the porters supplying on leg everything was necessary to wages warfare. Since of tsetse flight, beasts of load couldn't be utilized. So instead of setting gun on the behind of mules they would be break separately and put on the backs of men. To transportation a ship wherever down there was no rail link, it might be break in thousands and thousands of components and later transferred by humane beings. The facility dark porters endured were disgusting and the treks were deadly. The drafts company composer and piece of music CEO is Thuthuka Sibisi. He says the dispute among the Europe powers, and their encounters in African cultures, gives a wealthy melodic color to job in. Dark soldiers were fight for the UK colonies, or for the Germans, or the Belgians. So how's a really facility talk that we relate to in piece of music, things are ever winding behind on themselves. Thou might include an African warfare chant that is later infringed on by West modernist, or a nice waltz that might go of Vienna or Paris that has an African anthem upcoming through he. Company composer Philip Milling machine operator says they've had a beautiful box of creation to act on. We include moments wherever down there are conversations among melodic genres that are nearly collisions. Milling machine operator and Sibisi created a driving succession wherever God Rescue the Tsar is sung on phase, at first by recital treble vote and later chorally. We solved we couldn't fair include it as although we were permanent in a council in England. We drag it separately and rotate it about and we end up in Thing Love Maskandi, Zulu national music. The job will be seen in Germany and in New York, but William Kentridge says same's happy the opening is in one end of the enormous turbine room at Tate Contemporary. This phase in London is 55 meters length so he's enormous, but we include a big history to speak and partially he's on the length parade to war, so the form is of utilize, he says. The Tate Contemporary is frequently imbued in the beautiful of the humane vote, but Kentridge says the events represented stemmed of severe policy fact. Down there's a way in that for Africa the at first Planet War was very a complete of the meeting of Berlin in the 1880s how was while the Europe powers cut up Africa for their own ends. Later in Planet War I Germany was cut out generally and we saw several of how on phase. He's been offered how about 100,000 men dead work as communication for the Germans, and the identical for the UK. But down there are no everywhere recognized figures. The chunk shows how several hoped showing customer loyalty for the war might give stairs to autonomy at the warfare's late. It never happened, although one of the main letter we encounter is the against colonial protester John Chilumwe. William Kentridge says the actual impact came so following the warfare. Africa's leaders mind if they took portion they would get more than earth rights, be purified superior and Africa would begin to changing. So down there were fair the one stirrings of Africa since it honored superior. In the chief and the loading we shall how start, but down there was a length way yet to journey. The chief and the loading is game at Tate contemporary in London of environment to Saturday.